This video is part 1 on the origins of the Vietnamese people, from an archaeological and ethnolinguistic perspective. The first evidence of people in Vietnam came from the Paleolithic or Old Stone Age, with the discovery of the Sơn Vi culture from 20,000 to 12,000 BC. Discovered around the village of Sơn Vi, Lâm Thao district, Phu Tho province. These people would have used stone tools and lived a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. From about 12,000 to 10,000 BC, which is the Mesolithic or Middle Stone Age, the Hòa Bình culture dominated the area. These were dark-skinned people who have no resemblance to modern-day Vietnamese and are actually more closely related to the modern indigenous tribal groups of mainland Southeast Asia. The Hòa Bình culture, as it's now known, spanned from North Vietnam to Malaysia. But other related findings have been discovered in southeast and southwest China, eastern India and Nepal, and possibly Australia, which may attest to the common ancestral connections between the peoples of Oceania, South Asia and East Asia. Following the Hòa Bình culture were the Bắc Sơn, Quỳnh Văn, and Da Bút cultures, which belong to the Neolithic or New Stone Age. It's believed that up to this time, the cultures were still hunter-gatherers. And this leads us to the Bronze Age with the Phùng Nguyên culture from 2000 to 1500 BC. The Phùng Nguyên culture was formed as one of the 4 ancient migration pathways from current-day southern China into Southeast Asia, specifically the Austroasiatic migration. The other migrations are the Austronesian, Kredai, and Hongmian. These migrations would eventually develop into the modern-day peoples and languages of Southeast Asia. Rice cultivation had already been occurring in southern China from about 10,000 BC, and these migrations introduced rice cultivation into Southeast Asia. This would forever change the landscape of this region. Just to explain it a bit further, these terms relate to ancestral language families. It's important to note that populations that speak the same language often share the same culture and genetics as well, hence the term ethnolinguistic. So these ethnolinguistic migrations simply refer to the movements of populations who share the same ancestral language. Note that southern China at this time was not inhabited by ancestors of modern-day Chinese. They were still in northern China and had not expanded southwards yet. The Austroasiatic migrations would plant the seeds that would eventually become the Vietnamese, Cambodians, and numerous ethnic minorities that share the Austroasiatic language family. The Austronesian migration would result in modern-day languages and peoples of maritime Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands, which includes the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, Samoa, and Tonga. Similarly, the Kredai migrations would result in the modern-day peoples of Thailand and Laos, as well as the Zhuang ethnic minority of southwest China. The Hmong Mien migrations will become the Hmong and Mien ethnic minorities of Vietnam, Laos, and China. And just to make the point, the Chinese people and languages started from the Sino-Tibetan migration, which originated around northern China. That is to say, East Asians and Southeast Asians are genetically distinct from one another. Vietnam is a slightly different case, due to a little over 1,000 years of near-continuous Chinese rule, from 111 BC to 939 AD. This has resulted in up to 60% of East Asian DNA among modern-day Northern Vietnamese, and less so for Southern Vietnamese. In fact, about 20% of South Vietnamese also has some Cambodian ancestry due to local admixture. This has also affected the Vietnamese language as well, which actually shares the same Austroasiatic language family with Khmer, the Cambodian language. However, Vietnamese and Khmer sound drastically different to one another, and this is due to the Chinese influence that has resulted in about 30% of the informal Vietnamese and up to 60% of the formal Vietnamese being Hán Việt, Sino-Vietnamese, being especially influenced by the southern Chinese Yut languages like Cantonese. So you'll hear people saying that the Vietnamese people and the language originated from China. Look, technically, that's true, but it's a bit more nuanced than that. The Vietnamese originated with the Austroasiatic migration from the lands of modern-day southern China, which back then was not Chinese inhabited. And although Vietnamese have up to 60% East Asian ancestry, and up to 60% of its language is Sino-Vietnamese, that is due to the strong Chinese influence later in Vietnam's history, rather than from its origin. I hope that makes sense. Therefore, Vietnam is a unique hybrid both genetically, culturally, and linguistically of East and Southeast Asia. But okay, let's pivot back to the realm of archaeology and the Phùng Nguyên culture. To put things into a global context, This was roughly around the time of the Xia dynasty in China, which was the beginning of Chinese civilization. This was also the time of the Greek Bronze Age, what is called the Mycenaean civilization. The Babylonian Empire was in slow decline. The Egyptian civilization was already at least 1,000 years old. Now after about 1,000 years, the Phùng Nguyên was succeeded by the Đông Sơn Culture from about 1000 BC to 100 AD, where there was a massive leap to wet rice agriculture, i.e. permanent rice fields. This allowed the people to settle permanently into the fertile Red River Delta. And it is the Đông Sơn culture that is believed to be the ancestors of modern-day Vietnamese people, and the beginning of Vietnamese oral history. The Đông Sơn culture has been correlated historically to the first Vietnamese state called Văn Lang, ruled by Hùng Vương, but more about that in the next video. Again, to set this in the global historical context, during this time the Chinese were into the third dynasty, the Zhou dynasty. The first Korean kingdom of Gojoseon had already come into existence. Ancient Greece would be taken over by the Roman Empire. Now back to Vietnam and the Đông Sơn culture. This culture was skilled at bronze casting, with a number of large bronze drums being excavated featuring intricate patterns. These drums are up to 1 meter in height and up to 1 kilogram in weight. It's thought that they were used both as musical instruments and objects of worship. More than 200 have been found across an area from Indonesia to southern China, suggesting they were objects of trade as well. Đông Sơn drums depict housing, clothing, customs, habits, and cultural activities of the Đông Sơn culture. The intricate patterns on the Đông Sơn drums are a much celebrated symbol of the Vietnamese people. So I hope you found this video helpful and interesting. I'll see you in part 2.